Like, if you've met a kid, you've met a kid with special needs.
Hello and welcome. I'm Zylla, and this is my Athenaeum. And today we're on to part 2 of my series, The Ivory Tower, concerning education in the US. If you'd like to start from the beginning, you can click the link above or in the description below. The American education system is stratified in a number of different ways, which really all amount to the same central thing: hierarchy. And there's one form of hierarchy that is undeniable, and honestly, the system would probably be proud of it if you asked. That of special needs, normal, and gifted. These programs are clearly there to help. Remember that Department of Education motto, ensuring equal access? Well, what is special needs if not a good faith attempt to ensure that every child gets equal access to education? This was made with the best of intentions. And good intentions are all we need, right? IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, also known as Section 300.39, defines special education as specially designed instruction at no cost to the parents to meet the unique needs of a child with a disability. It then goes on to outline types of education and provide federal funding. IDEA funds early intervention for infants up through age 2 at home, and then provides in-school support for people aged 3 through 21. As of the latest data, they were supporting around 7.5 million children and young adults all over the country. This law started out in 1975 as the Education for All Handicapped Children Act. Congress reauthorized it in 2004 with some updated language, and then again in 2015 with amendment to expand its reach. The language on the website shows a clear focus on the civil rights aspect of education. Disability is a natural part of the human experience and in no way diminishes the right of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. Improving educational results for children with disabilities is an essential element of our national policy of ensuring equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities. IDEA funds more than a few programs. Everything from dedicated schools for the deaf or the blind to early intervention services for children with learning disabilities to research projects on those programs and those of private foundations to assess their efficacy. There are websites with resources for parents to educate themselves about not only what their child's disability might be, but also what services are available in their immediate area. Doesn't it all sound grand? There's no question that IDEA addresses a real and serious problem. All children, regardless of their disability status, deserve an education, and they certainly weren't getting it before IDEA and its sister legislation, the Americans with Disability Act, or ADA. In fact, before those laws were implemented, things could be downright draconian.
My experiences in the public school system, growing up with a disability in the 50s and 60s, 1950s and 60s. I wear an artificial leg above the knee due to a birth defect. I started kindergarten in 1959. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that summer I turned 5. And so then I had like that whole summer before I started school. My mom had purchased a doll and a book and all these ways for me to practice to do this stuff. My mom did start asking around, and there was a special school for people with physical and mental disabilities, which if I had had cerebral palsy or what you call it, if I'd been born with the hole in my spine or some other thing that put me in a wheelchair, I would definitely have ended up there. And it was not educational. So it's August in Ohio, 100 degrees out, humidity's 100%, right? And we go to the local elementary school that I'm going to be attending, and we meet with the principal in his office. And my mom and dad bring all my winter outside clothes. And the questions that they asked were, can Cindy go to the bathroom by herself? Does she need help? Because it was a class, I'm a baby boomer. There were 36 kids in my kindergarten class, and that teacher had one part-time assistant, one for 36 kids. So there were 18 kids per adult in that room. She could not go in there and help me go to the bathroom. So I had to show him that I could get on all my, my snow pants and my jacket and my mittens and my hat and my boots. So I had to show that I could do all that stuff and put them on and take them off in front of the principal by myself with no help from my mother or my father, to just show the principal that I was not going to be, quote, a burden to the kindergarten teacher. I mean, my mom was relentless, right? Because she absolutely did not want me to end up in the other place, which was really a holding pen for the mentally retarded.
So I don't want to downplay what IDEA and the ADA have done. But what do these programs really look like in practice? First, let's briefly discuss early intervention, services for children younger than 3. Now, ideally, these children are routinely checked by their doctors and caregivers for any developmental anomalies, which is to say, developments in their motor skills, reactions, etc. that fall outside the generally accepted timelines for such things developing. According to the nonprofit 0 to 3, an early intervention service funded by IDEA, the infants and toddlers meeting that requirement in the US at any given time is about 18%. If a doctor recommends early intervention, the family can then apply for services like those of 0 to 3. That could look like anything from training in American Sign Language for a deaf or hard of hearing child to physical therapy for a child with slow motor skill development. In theory, these services are provided free of charge and tailored to the individual's needs. The evidence for the efficacy of early intervention varies, naturally, depending on what's being addressed and how long the intervention goes on, and so on. But we do have a fair quantity of data which suggest that these programs help to close that gap between disabled and disadvantaged students and their abled and privileged peers.
First, high-quality center-based programs enhance vulnerable children's school-related achievement and behaviors. Second, these effects are strongest for poor children and for children whose parents have little education. Third, these positive benefits continue into the late elementary school and high school years, although effects are smaller than they were at the beginning of elementary school. And fourth, programs that are continued into elementary school and that offer high doses of early intervention have the most sustained long-term effects. It is unrealistic, given our knowledge of development, to expect short-term early interventions to last indefinitely, especially if children end up attending poor-quality schools. It is magical thinking to expect that if we intervene in the early years, no further help will be needed by children in the elementary school years and beyond.
All right, so moving on, what happens when these children enter school? Do these programs disappear, and what school-based support is there? Once a child is in school, they can be assessed for an Individualized Education Plan, or IEP. The Department of Education calls IEPs the cornerstone of quality education for each child with a disability, and gushes that each IEP must be for one child and must be a truly individualized document. They also warn that each municipality might need to create its own regulations to make sure that IEPs are working. The IEP is built from an initial assessment of the child, plus a meeting between the child's parent or guardian and the appropriate school and educational officials. It very clearly lays out which interventions will be provided, what goals they'll have in mind, and how the child's progress will be assessed. Then it is reviewed every year and reassessed in total every 3. Sounds great, right?
When I had trouble, when my parents split and I was having emotional trouble in school and having difficulty completing my work, my vision teacher was one of the teachers who advocated for me, who saw that there was something wrong and was like, let us all work together. She was part of my educational team. I had IEPs, individualized education plans. Mm-hmm. I went to those meetings. The vision teacher was in there, and generally I had a pretty easy time because I was a success story. They gave me what I needed. If I needed something different, I asked for it. I was pretty good at knowing what I needed, but also I went to a school system, and I can't tell you how important this is, that didn't take things away when they worked. And I get calls now from people in my current job, which I'm not representing here, but I get calls now from people who are like, look, I know I have some kind of learning disability and I had an IEP in school, but then when I started doing okay with what they gave me, they're like, well, you're fine now, and they took it away. And that's very, very common. And I suspect that's especially common with students of color. And that is not, I had an entire system backing me up in a way that I want to say your average kid with a learning disability may not have had.
So it's essentially allowing special rules, like exceptions and things for your child. It can be a lot of different things. But by its nature, though, what it's still doing is it's very goal-oriented. Mm-hmm. And this is where I would have to argue in the meetings, they love to throw eye contact bullshit on there. So it'd be phrased in a way of hey, by the end of the semester, they will make eye contact 10% more often, right? It'd be some sort of measurable goal, things like that.
How do you even measure that?
They literally note it basically. So it'll be hey, I called their name and they didn't do it. I can write it down. And so it's literally basically how can we apply metrics to everything?
Wow.
Yeah, it's not great.
So it's an extra set of goals on top of normal education goals?
It also has accommodations stuff in there. It's just that
so it's also stuff like extra time on tests or
right. Yes, it's just that the goals are likely going to be part of it. Part of the thing is showing improvement, which is another huge problem with this stuff. Is even the accommodations you get. I've heard a lot of stories where a kid basically you lose your accommodations. If you start doing okay because of the accommodations, they take them away because you don't need them anymore. And then of course they struggle because they were only doing okay because they were actually being accommodated.
Right. It's like taking somebody's cancer treatment away because it started to go into remission.
Yeah, actually, that's an apt analogy because it's essentially, I would argue that a lot of the IEP stuff is still very baked in kind of the medical model, I guess, of things. So it's very much so how are we improving you?
So what goes on once a kid has an IEP anyway? Once again, it varies greatly, particularly by state and then within state by school district. Some school districts have enough children with particularly strong visual or auditory impairments that they can have schools that cater specifically to that demographic. And similarly, some districts have a school that is just for children with learning disabilities. These have the obvious downside of sequestering those students from their peers, but the obvious benefit that all their classmates are in the same boat. But those types of schools don't exist everywhere. And even where they do, they might not be the best choice for an individual child. So there are plenty of interventions and accommodations that are made available within mainstream public schools. The most common intervention for children inside mainstream schools is special education classes. This could look like a separate track alongside the mainstream students, or it could be separate classes for things like dyslexia alongside history and English. This has the obvious upside that children are integrated with their mainstream peers. In fact, the IDEA website boasts that in 2020 to 2021, more than 66% of children with disabilities are in general education classrooms 80% or more of their school day. It also has the obvious downside of splitting kids within the same peer group into special ed and normal.
But I'd heard the banking model before that. But it's basically just this idea of the teacher's purpose is to be an authority figure who is depositing pieces of information to the student. And so the student is just there to receive. That the thing is that obviously makes it much easier to do like a cookie cutter approach, where it's like, hey, I have these 50 lessons, we do the 50 lessons in order. There's no adapting to who's in my class, or right, which then lends into, oh, well, how do we fix the system for people who don't fit into this? That's kind of where you get the nonsense like special needs. That didn't start as like, how do we help these kids? That started as, how do we get these kids out of our class?
Well, I think it's a push-pull type of situation. It really is. And there's a problem there, because if the kids don't think about themselves as being able to do something, then no matter what you do, it's really hard to get past that feeling that they have about themselves. And you put them in the LD room and so on. Some schools I've seen, you're in the LD room only for certain subjects, and that's kind of really a way to kind of sort of make sense of this, because you've got a lot of students who and I saw them most of my career. I have worked with students who have learning difficulties and so on. Students who couldn't. I think one of the worst things in my second job was I was in a faculty meeting, and the head of the business department stands up in front of the entire faculty. And he said, what are we going to do with students who can't learn now that we can't put them in sociology anymore? And I am telling you, I almost fell out of my chair. Why would you choose sociology as the trash heap of people who were hopeless? What the heck kind of attitude is that for a professor to take? If even to this day, I can hear him saying that, and in my mind, I said, you have no idea what they can do. You just don't know, and you don't care. But don't tell me that the people who are in front of me can't learn.
The year that I started kindergarten would have been the year that the WISC-3 test was employed. And I find that interesting, because that's usually the test that parents are kind of referring to when they're starting to look around for diagnoses for their children being learning disabled. I don't know that I was diagnosed as dyslexic around then or before then, because I'm pretty sure, and I have this memory of having to take medication. I believe they were giving us Ritalin. And there was another pill called Cylert that my parents also insisted that I take. So I'm hazy on the details on this about when and where my dyslexia became part of my educational narrative, but it was very much a part of it from the beginning. And that haunted me all through K through 5th grade and then middle school, and it limited where I could go to middle school. My parents decided that to take me out of the mainstream education and put me in special school for children with disabilities in middle school. Like I had no choice in the matter. In high school, they also insisted that I continue to attend special school, even though at that point I was testing normal. I was testing the same as other children taking the WISC, although by then I guess it was like the WISC 4 or something. But my parents never allowed me to mainstream after they took me out of mainstream. But I'm unhappy when I look back on it. I'm unhappy that I was stuck in a special school where we literally rode short buses and were told day in and day out that we were broken and different and needed to take these pills, and that we probably weren't going to amount to much.
Some other interventions that might exist are individual coaches for specific children. Someone like a sign interpreter or a behavioral health person. But again, these folks may or may not exist in a given school district. One commonly available intervention, touted by the IDEA website, is ABA, or Applied Behavioral Analysis, and described by Psychology Today as a type of therapy frequently applied to children with autism and other developmental disorders that focuses on imparting skills in specific domains of functioning, such as social skills, communication, academic and learning skills, motor dexterity, hygiene and grooming, and more. Tailored to individual needs, ABA is delivered in a variety of settings, including school, home, clinic, and other community settings. The goal of treatment is to help children function as independently and successfully as possible. Research shows that consistent ABA can significantly improve behaviors and skills and decrease the need for special services. Warning: I'm about to show you what ABA looks like. If that disturbed you, good. It should. It goes against everything we know about how to raise a well-adjusted child. Denial of emotional expression, denial of comfort, denial of bodily autonomy. The Autism Self-Advocacy Network refers to ABA as torture, saying,
ABA was founded by Ole Varlovas and derived from the same principles as conversion therapy, of which he was a co-creator. Conversion therapy for LGBTQ individuals has since been condemned as a form of torture, and survivors describe conversion therapy and ABA as having similar traumatizing consequences.
This goes on for hours every day. At school, at home, until the child learns that they must cut themselves to pieces so as not to inconvenience the people around them. Not all interventions are good. To return to positive accommodations, there are also a number of small effort interventions that can be managed by individual teachers, such as letting a child with visual impairment sit closer to the front to see the board, or giving extra time on tests. Many of these interventions do exist and are required by IEPs, and they also might be given without them in consideration of the student.
when you talk about differentiated support for students, you are acknowledging that students may need different access points to be successful with grade level content. So we might talk about in a 6th grade class that there are still some students who need times tables sheets because they have challenges doing that kind of quick processing. Or it might be that this child gets very overwhelmed when there's 15 problems on a page. So I'm going to give them those 15 problems, but they're going to be split up over single pages that they turn in at a time. Or I have a child who is visually impaired, and so I might need to provide them with those with additional things that respect and reflect their classroom needs. Some of those can rise to the level of special education, like in the case of that last student. Others may not and are really just about pedagogical reflection.
All this, I think, can be summarized in 3 questions. Does the intervention exist? Is it any good? And is the student left with any privacy whatsoever once it's implemented? Teachers trained in special education in a serious way are hard to come by. Even where those courses for learning teachers exist, I've encountered more than one educator whose classes that went beyond the banking model cookie cutter classes were outdated, vague, or downright horrific. One teacher I spoke to, Lynn Cartwright-Punnett, who is an ESL-trained teacher who works with a math program for underprivileged kids in New York City, told me that when she took a specialized training course, it was very vague, all theoretical, and when it came to the practical advice, all they were told was, differentiate your education plans. But they were given no instruction as to how. For another, there simply aren't enough people to fill all the needs. Let's be honest, this job is difficult, low-paying, and very much disrespected. So even when they are there, these resources, they may not be all that great.
It was a hybrid program that I didn't myself do, but I had friends in. I was just going for an ed minor and could take some program courses. It was a 5-year program that I think awarded an MA, but required getting started in undergrad. It was relatively structured. So generally, we were intended to be assigned one specific teacher to shadow for our time in the schools, but usually there was some light rule bending there, and shadowing students like myself were sent to different classrooms during things like planning periods, and so we got to see a few other classes, schedule permitting. I was there to observe a history class that had a fairly wide range of ASD students, as per the nature of the school, most all students had other cognitive impairments. I was paired with a teacher who knew their stuff, but in his planning period, an informal arrangement was set up for me to shadow an English teacher who said, yeah, sure, to having me involved. Her class of 6 had just her teaching it. This broke the expected 3-to-1 ratio that I was not supposed to count for. The story starts with all that info. I was in a classroom I wasn't technically on file for being in, working with a woman who had some dubious views, it would turn out, about working in ed. It turned out she was very clearly of the mindset that disabled children were angels, that they were harmless little creatures with no agency, God's gift of little innocent perfect forever children, which, as literally anyone who has ever worked in a kindergarten will tell you, that's a terrible presumption to make of any child, period, because children are chaotic and have tantrums, etc., etc. One day, a student got upset in another classroom to the point of necessitating restraint, according to the school, and threw a chair and was wandering the hallway screaming. It was handled relatively swiftly, and there was no harm done. Things de-escalated, and she was able to calm down in a room designed to stop/lessen overstimulation. But this somehow hit the English teacher hard, to such a degree that she swiftly excused herself, locked herself in the classroom closet to have a long cry, leaving me with 6 middle school-aged ASD students I was not qualified to oversee, while also talking around why she essentially fled to a closet because her warped and fragile understanding of her own role in the students shattered. It was only one class period, and I know schools are hard up to find people to work in them, but before that I wasn't super confident in her position to teach from, and after that I was entirely certain she could be the source of some big issues.
For the school, we had 3 special education teachers who had a caseload of maybe 25 to 40 students, which is a high caseload, but it's pretty common at this point in public schools. We had a few social workers that handled as many students as they could who had regularly scheduled appointments. And they would sometimes, when they had capacity, those special educators, those social workers would work to help teachers plan for that differentiation. They could give that time, but as an educator, you're often on your own. So we can offer more special educators, but it turns out that there are a lot of unidentified students out there, students who do have drastically different mental, emotional, social, intellectual, physical needs that aren't being noticed, especially with pandemic. And we can continue hiring manpower, but it's from an ever dwindling pool. And some of those supports are things we should be providing to students just because it's the right thing to do. But it also makes a teacher's particular day, a 16 to 20 hour day. I'm what my colleagues would often refer to as a pretty minimalist teacher. I definitely have not thought any of my classrooms were particularly Pinterest worthy, and I've been okay with that. But I always would max out my, what they call the teacher tax credit, the amount of money that you can get reimbursed federally every year on pencils, because students wouldn't have supplies, notebooks and folders because students' families couldn't afford them after they, did a back to school book drive. I would regularly buy granola bars because even if a school offers free lunch, the cafeteria closes at 8:30. And if a student is late to school, a granola bar might be the first thing they've eaten in 12 hours. I know certainly any of the schools I've worked at have done jacket drives in the winter to make sure that kids have coats, and I've contributed to those. Fundraisers to make sure that a student's extracurricular club or sport can be fully funded. I've definitely been out there on the weekends doing car washes. So that's material things. And I certainly know teachers who've gone above and beyond that. As far as time goes, even in spots where I was lucky and I was given a couple prep periods to do lesson planning or grading during the school day, I easily would spend 20 to 25 hours a week on things like grading, lesson planning, assessment review, all those other odds and ends that need to be done, looking over students' individualized education plans, looking over students' behavioral plans. There's not enough time to get those done during the school day at various schools. So that work has to still get done.
Did you say that when you were lucky, you had 1 or 2 planning periods?
Yes. So I have definitely, you might be asked, especially now with widespread teacher shortages, that 1 to 2 hours a day you had to get your stuff done, you might be needed to go cover somebody else's class because a school hasn't had a science teacher in 6 months. Or suddenly there's a security issue where we're dealing with a student having a mental health crisis. And we actually now, for legal reasons and for safety reasons, need an adult in this hallway for the next 45 minutes. So we're going to take that prep period. Teachers have been making do with less in terms of people power for as long as I've been teaching. And from what I understand, for some school districts, it's been longer. So sometimes when it gets called and the choice is between, well, I need to take this time to get something done for my class, and I need to go cover for this because we need an adult to be responsible for these children, it can feel incredibly selfish and can, in some cases of contracts, be illegal to not go cover that spot.
Right. So for 20 to 25 hours of non-classroom work in a week, you would get at very most 10 hours paid.
Correct.
Not to mention that a lack of public education about topics like neurodiversity can lead parents and caregivers to have really difficult decisions that they face with not enough information on how best to protect their child and their child's privacy.
I would say that they really were trying. You know, I didn't really have any battles. They pretty much just agreed with everything. But even with that, we were constantly running into things that were like, one, we were just shocked what the default was, like how many things you had to explicitly spell out. So like, for example, during pre-K, we would have a lot of issues if like the teacher was out. Like we had a nice system set up with her, so she knew, right? So like one of the things we set up was kind of like, hey, here are signs that we know our kid will tend to display behaviors if he's starting to get stressed. So then they would know like, oh, maybe he can use some ear protectors or go somewhere else to kind of calm down for a little bit before it gets to that point. So when there was a substitute teacher, they wouldn't hand that information over. So apparently, and it's like on one hand, I kind of understand from privacy concern, I guess. But what really baffled me was, so I brought up like, well, what the hell? Like, no, we want this stuff passed on because we don't want, like, that just sucks for our kid. And they were like, we totally agree. We're actually surprised though, because like most parents explicitly do not want that stuff handed over. Like they don't want anyone to know. And I've seen a lot of that. Like I'm both from either talking to family members who didn't do stuff for their kids, like my cousins or stuff, or other people I've talked to. Like a lot of times parents will get the diagnosis, but like not share that information with their kid. And they basically try to hide it. And so they'll get the basic
because of the stigma.
Yeah. Well, and they're worried their kid will use it as an excuse, as a common like bullshit thing, right?
Let's imagine this from a student's perspective. Since before you can remember, you've been singled out as special needs. Your parents and the school or the state will dictate the ways in which your life differs from that of your peers, potentially without consulting you. And every teacher, every coach, every counselor you ever have will have intimate knowledge of your mental and medical history as it applies to your IEP. The school is incentivized by a lack of funding to take away every accommodation they can get away with, and if something is really working for you, it will almost certainly be taken away because you don't seem like you need it anymore, even though that accommodation is what lets you get to that point. Your peers are made aware at every step of the way that you are different, unless you went to a separate but equal school. Is IDEA really working for you?
People don't understand that students are humiliated. Many of them feel humiliated being identified as being part of the learning disabled cadre. And I see no reason to have to do that, to humiliate them that way. One of my students, who was a very bright guy, he was an older student, and he came to me. I'll never forget, every time he came to me, I'm thinking, oh my God, what is he going to tell me now? Because he always started the same way. You don't know this, but over at the Learning Center, they send you every single learning disabled person that they can get into your class. They get them enrolled in it. And I said, you're right, I don't know that. And he said, I've seen him put 15 people in one of your classes. And I'm sitting there going, oh, who were they? And he said, that's the reason they put them in there. Because somehow or other they learn and they pick up what they need to pick up, and then they just go on and they're enabled to keep going on. And I'm sitting there going, oh, okay, I'm glad for that part.
So in other words, if I'm understanding you right, basically what you saw a lot of times was the very rigid system of categorization of putting people into a learning disabled track and giving them these very, like untailored special conditions, was actually hindering them and making them feel defective.
They didn't need it. And I will tell you honestly, in grade school and in high school, they felt very, very picked upon because the other kids would, make fun of them. So when they got to college, they were very amenable to somebody who said, yes, I'll help you, but let's try this first.
But wait, when I started in on this topic, I also mentioned the other part of the stratification, the gifted kids. What's that about? The gifted kid layer is way less codified than the special needs layer. And it goes by a few more names. Gifted and talented, AB and IP, Vanguard, Honors. It also starts generally later than the stratification of special needs, cropping up in middle or high school. Sometimes it's even self-selecting. There are, as for special education, special schools or programs within schools that gifted children can test into. These are usually called magnet programs. There are various competitions, prizes given out for academic and artistic achievement, and there are even special summer schools that if you do well enough on your standardized tests, you can go and take courses together all summer and bond with other gifted children from around the country. And just like with special education, there is a clear need being served here. If a child is really adept at academics, really enjoys the process of learning, and wants to go faster than the average coursework, shouldn't they be allowed to do that, to strive for the next level? And just like with special education, there's also a clear problem. Not only does the power dynamic with normal students cause social rifts, but there is a pressure. Even though the energy is positive, this pressure for gifted kids to constantly be achieving at the top of their game, to never slow down. And that can have some long-term effects too.
So I have an older sister, and she was always incredibly academically gifted. She is one of the brightest people that I know. She ended up going to university at Carnegie Mellon University, which for any people who are watching or listening to this later who are not familiar with that, it's a pretty good school here in the US. And we're not, growing up, we were very poor. So she got in on her academics. There was no, And so I always had these very big shoes to fill with her as my sister. And she ended up graduating high school as salutatorian or second in her class. And so I decided that I would make it my mission to graduate at the top of my class. And there's a lot of drama that I won't get into here, but believe me, juicy drama at this small town West Virginia high school as far as who got to be valedictorian. But I ended up, depending on who you ask, either valedictorian or tied for valedictorian. And so I'd always had these really, some may call them unhealthy feelings associated with grades and academic success. And I took those with me going into college, and I spent my first 2 years of college at a small liberal arts school, and it was genuinely an awesome experience. The only reason I left is because I couldn't afford it, because small liberal arts colleges are expensive. But it was also, just by nature of the kind of school it was also very challenging. Like, it was a very selective school, and so it was, they knew the kind of students that they had, and they challenged all of their students. And that was really the first time that I had been challenged academically. And it was rough to deal with that and learn, like, oh, hey, maybe I should learn how to study. Or, I can't just skate by on, whatever it is that I use to get through high school.
The gifted kid to burnout pipeline. Yes, I'm familiar with that one.
Aren't we all? God, it sucks.
And hey, come here. I want to tell you a secret that'll blow your mind. A lot of those gifted children are just neurodivergent, and under slightly different circumstances would have wound up in special ed.
Where I was struggling was not being able to kind of do my own thing, because I was a curious kid. Like, I was naturally very curious. I wanted to learn things. And where I ran into a lot of trouble with some of my teachers was because I was curious, because I wanted to know things, and I didn't want to just sit and absorb whatever they gave me as they gave it to me and then shut up otherwise. Or someone like not recognizing that different people are going to be into different things and good at different things. Like, I, to this day, hate math. Like, terrified of math, dyscalculia, like, not for me. I really want to get over it, but I just like I freeze when I'm forced to do math, even if it's really simple. And part of it is because when I was initially introduced to long division, I loved it. I loved it. I love long division. I loved algebra. I was obsessed because it was puzzle solving, right? So it was so much. So I absolutely adored it. I was having a great time. Math was fun. And then we went on to angles, fractions, and geometry. And now spatial reasoning, no problem. But for whatever reason, angles and fractions, and percentages, my brain did not get it, but I was told that I had to do it. And I was told that I had to keep up with the other kids. And I was struggling with it when just like a week beforehand, I'd been doing really, really well with math, and I'd been having a nice time.
I think it was only like a month in or so, and he just refused to go. He started getting kind of like in trouble for talking to friends, because for him, he was ahead on a lot of stuff. So like, I think he was pretty bored, to be honest. Yep. And so then when he got in there, like, then he was getting in trouble for like talking or taking too long eating lunch, or things like that, where like he'd get in trouble for like correcting the teacher or disrupting, right? Those kind of things were already happening, even though like supposedly, they were hearing us out.
So Mr. Dunson had seen me write some of my stories for class. He'd also done the language arts program with us. It was a supplementary program for kids with specifically reading disabilities or writing disabilities. And in that one, it was more freeform. You did do language workbooks. You were still working through grammar workbooks that most students go through in mainstream schools, but you were also doing extra stuff on the side to continue to hone those skills. Mr. Dunson, for example, had us watch episodes of The Twilight Zone and write essays on the themes of The Twilight Zone and research the directors and the actors and the writers in it to just sort of practice the researching skills that you need when you go to a reference library. And it was a pretty effective way of teaching to the small cohort of students that were with him that year. He felt Miss Para would have crushed me. He also told my mother that he felt I would be fine in a college preparatory English course, probably, maybe with some extra tutoring. But he encouraged her to encourage me to enroll at a community college and take my senior English there. And the only regret I have in doing that is I chickened out and did not take the dual credit for college, because I really did think I was too stupid for college. So I took senior English at community college with teen moms, with a couple of students who had failed out of their own classes that should have been graduating, with a couple of people who had recently gotten out of prison and then were trying to get their degree after all this time. It was a mix of people in that room who were not my age, who did not look like me, who did not talk like me, who did not have learning disabilities, but they were doing the same thing that I was doing, and they were no better and no worse at it. And it kind of started opening my mind a little bit more to what was possible.
And I can tell you this from my own experience. I was a gifted kid. I was on the gifted track from the moment I entered middle school, went to a magnet high school, did a round of those summer camps for all of us nerds who wanted to take things like quantum physics and neuropsychology on our summer breaks. I also have ADHD. I didn't believe it myself until a few years ago, because if I had ADHD, how could I have done so well in all my classes? How could I be pursuing higher education degrees? How could I have been that kid who the first time I lost a point on an assignment, I sobbed my heart out and swore to myself that I would do perfectly on the next one? Well, that's because that's how my ADHD presented. I hyper-focus on learning. I do really well in academic environments. I thrive, even taking tests. You know, if it didn't cost money, there's a serious chance I would have taken the LSATs just for fun. Even now, I'm spending my spare time learning a new language because, ooh, shiny. My rejection-sensitive dysphoria presents as perfectionism, as it does for a lot of neurodivergent folks who do fine in an academic environment. The lack of understanding around what neurodivergence looks like hurts us all. If I had truly understood that I had ADHD, I could have had accommodations, therapeutic support, instead of a panic attack the first time I didn't understand something in an honors math class.
Growing up, going to different schools, the only reason that I am as successful as a communicator as I am now is because I know how to code switch. Like, flat out, right? Like, in a direct way, it's because that means I know how to read a room. But also, it's like, because I have the practice in different sorts of fluencies, right? I understand how to get ideas across in different ways, or I understand what ideas are worth what are worth overemphasizing over others. I'm a personal advocate of that. You know, at least the public school system does do that, because code switching does come from like a Black experience. And, you know, so when I'm talking about it, I'm just talking about my own personal experience. But I believe you could open it up and just say like code switching is just even when neurodivergents have to deal with neurotypicals. Because now that I, looking back, is like a person who lived most of her life with undiagnosed ADHD, I'm like, oh wow, I've probably been neurodivergent this whole time then, shit. And that makes a lot more sense of like the type of conflicts or the type of confusions I would have.
I did not actually find out until late 2022 that I am in fact autistic. So I was one of the, you know, like tale as old as time, like young, queer, misdiagnosis autistic kid. But you know, born in 1989, I grew up in the time period where there were kids with autism who were all cis white boys who manifested exactly like this, and then people who were just quirky. And so me being just quirky, I didn't pick up on certain cues in the classroom. I didn't know when it was time to be quiet. I didn't know when it was time to sit down and be still. I didn't understand why people were asking me to do that. So a lot of the problems that I ran into were just kind of like me, who I am, existing in a space that was not made for people like me. So as a little kid, that was really, really the problem.
I definitely have felt that pressure of being the neurodivergent one in the room and not knowing why it's so much harder for me. And for me, it's ADHD, which is not at all classically presenting. Again, you know, like they're the cis white boys who present one certain way, and then they're the rest of us.
Yep. Yep.
Surprisingly, I was actually diagnosed early, but nobody really believed it because I was not classically presenting.
So then you had the added pressure of having to prove it to people, in addition to the struggles of being...
I didn't even believe it myself.
Oh, interesting.
Because I had no idea that ADHD could look like being a very studious child who was just aggravated by every little noise.
They would normally, the start of the class, they would go over the homework. And so to try to pay attention, I would normally kind of doodle. Or something to, you know, and I would check just to kind of see like, oh, okay, I got the right answer. If I didn't, then I could look at the work and figure out what's wrong. So it's one of those things where like I was actually trying to be a good student, right? And like, but they were talking or something. I don't remember. Again, like I think I wasn't even the one talking. Like someone said something to me maybe, and I got this like, do you want to come up here and teach the class? You know, since you apparently don't need. And so like, and this is one of those things where so I actually got up and finished going over the homework. And she's just sitting at the desk. Yeah. Oh God. Like it was, and I
beautiful.
Yeah. Like so, and I had looking back, I can just imagine how fucking pissed she was. But like, I didn't get it at the time. Like I really was like, okay. Like I mean, I obviously knew that like it's weird I was getting singled out, but like outside of that, I didn't really think that much at the time. So I went through the homework, and then when I finished the homework, she just kind of looked at me and she said, I don't know what to do. So I flipped through the book to the next chapter and just started trying to teach the next thing because I was at a loss what to do. And she got all of a sudden she was like, that's it, come with me. And she brought me out of the classroom and made me sit in some classroom across the hall that was empty and just sit there with like the lights out for like the class. I then came back and like yelled at me later for like how disrespectful I was. And this is one of those moments where I was like, I don't understand what just happened.
When I look back on it, I see it as like a much more locked down environment because there were fewer of us. The teachers had an easier time sort of policing interactions between students, making sure that you only had the 5 minutes to walk between classrooms when the bell rang. There was a lot more rigidity and structure in the special school. Some of that I do think is a byproduct of the fact that it's for children with learning disabilities, for those that struggle with obsessive compulsive disorder or who struggle with ADHD. Having that structure is critical. And I have seen the benefits of it on my peers and even on me. Like I did learn a sense of time and responsibility and I knew where I was supposed to be, unlike in public school where I was just sort of kind of guessing and going along with the crowd. So there were some benefits to that. However, there was a distinct lack of trust. You always sort of got the sense that they thought that you were retarded. And I do mean that with the hard R's at both ends of that word, because there was disdain under all of it. Even among the teachers who were enormously compassionate, you would catch an eye roll from time to time, an exasperated sigh from time to time, like, come the fuck on, kid, why can't you do this? And that is something that is intimately familiar to any child who does have a learning disability, because there's that day when you realize you're not getting it, but everybody else around you is. And you do feel stupid. And if there's an adult in your life who's backing that up, who's basically reinforcing that, real nightmare. And it just sticks with you for the rest of your life. So that even if you are sitting somewhere normal, like Stanford, you still have in the back of your head this tiny little suspicion that, God, maybe there is something wrong with me. Do I really belong here? And that imposter syndrome is just with you forever.
So if you could have chosen to go to public school, would you have?
I would have. I did ask my parents about it once. It was middle school. I had made some friends through hobbies. I had a friend in theater. The friend invited me to a birthday party and I met my high school best friend. This was a person who went to a mainstream school and they seemed like me. They sometimes slipped letters around all the time, but they literally talked and spoke and looked and thought just like I did. And they weren't retarded. Maybe I could do what they did. You know, both of my parents really did have doubts that I could do it. They really, really did. And I don't know where those doubts necessarily came from. I was doing well in school.
This stratification is a breeding ground for pain. The gifted kid feels constant pressure to perform at their peak at all costs, or they internalize the lazy kid stereotype and assume that they're just not good enough. They could only fill their potential. The normal kid feels lesser than the gifted kids and set apart from them, but at the same time looks down on the special ed kids, and the special ed kids internalize that they are never going to be enough, that they will always be lesser, that they will never make it, whatever making it means. All of these programs are intended to help, but they're hurting too. So what do we do about it?
I mean, I do think like tackling the baking model is a huge piece, and having a more like democratic like participation like in the classroom, I think would probably be the easiest thing to point to. Obviously, that's a really big
yeah.
thing.
This
to
huge
change.
systemic thing. But the philosophy of how education happens.
Yeah.
And changing that basic assumption could usefully restructure our whole system, I think.
Right. Like, I think that just changes everything. By the nature of that, it's going to be more open to communication differences. It's going to be more open to just a lot of stuff. And yeah, so I think that's the way you have to go. And I think that's a really key thing. And I guess just to add, another important reason, obviously, when doing that is like, like I said, like, I didn't know I was autistic. And the thing is, a lot of people aren't going to know. So one, the solution should always be, that you don't have to give that information out, first off. So even if you know it. So the solution, it's important, I think, to look at it that way, where it's like, this helps everyone. It means that whether or not someone's diagnosed or they don't want to tell us, it's going to help them. And I think that's an important framing of the issue, because anytime you are not doing it that way, you're essentially just creating like a weird kind of like gatekeeping thing, which is normally going to be tied to money.
Educationally, we need to give as many accommodations as we need to. Okay? For that kid with spina bifida, that kid with cerebral palsy, that kid with muscular dystrophy, whatever it is, we need to give as many accommodations as we can so that we make sure we don't lose this incredible intelligence, intellect, and personality.
I would teach every child in every class as if they were learning disabled. Every single one. And what happens when you do that? The kids who need the differences, they're not now different from everybody else. You don't know who they are. And the kids that are of average, and especially the above average ones, this will blow their minds. It will blow their minds. Why? Because there's freedom in those choices. And they begin to see patterns quicker, it's true. But that's not a bad thing, because they can use those patterns. They'll make those patterns their own. And then they'll repeat them again and again and again. And there will be no reason to make a kid who's classified as LD make fun of them, because the classes they're in are the same thing.
The truth is that education is always at its best when self-driven and fostered by individualized attention and accommodations. When everybody gets specialized treatment, nobody is pressured past their limits or left to fall between the cracks. In other words, when everybody's special ed, nobody is. And besides, giving baseline accommodations helps everybody.
Anyone who tells you that access anything but messy and squishy is lying to you.
Right. There's no one way to do it except individually.
This is commonly known as the curb cut effect. When wheelchair-accessible ramps at crosswalks on sidewalks were implemented, it was quickly realized that it wasn't just benefiting wheelchair users, but also elderly folks with walkers, people with baby strollers, people on skateboards and scooters. The effect was so profound that it made a serious impression on how we think about design in general. Nowadays, most of us don't notice the cut curbs, but proponents of universal design still call this after the curb cut 60 years later. As ye do unto the least adaptable of these, so ye do unto me.
I think it's universal design and learning, UDL, is what, and I am less familiar with the nitty gritty of how that works. I am not an educator. But it's the idea that you design things so that it works for everybody. It is the curb cut principle put forth in education. That does not mean you dumb everything down or anything like that. But like, if you're explaining things, plain language helps everybody, right? Mm-hmm. Making sure that information is delivered in multiple modalities she says immediately after saying plain language is important, um, is really important, because whether or not somebody has a disability, they probably have a way they learn best. The world is not like that.
And honestly, a lot of those accommodations would help sighted people, just
right.
like
they would just
the cut
fit
curb
in.
rule.
There's so many things that would just fit in. It doesn't have to be the special thing you do for blind people. But then you come out of there and it's a whole nother, I went to the Society for Disability Studies conference once. And it was amazing. No matter how long it took someone to say the thing, because they might have a speech issue, you waited for them. And if it took them 2 minutes to get the sentence out, that's what you do. Everything was in large print and was described for folks, and everybody described who they were and what they looked like. And there were interpreters everywhere, and everything was done. And it was in DC. And then I got on the metro. And it was just like, and Jay, random person, started making fun of how close I was reading. I was like, shit, it's a little more jarring to come out of that world into this one now. But like, it could be like that, right? It wasn't that big a deal for people to just make it part of how they carry out stuff. And that is the opposite of how our educational system is set up.
This has a lot of implications, and not just for how we think about disability, poverty, and advanced education, but also for how we teach generally. Because if each student is a complete and unique individual, then we really cannot keep trying to score them against each other and hoping the competition will sort things out fairly.
A lot of my self-worth was tied to academics, and just reflecting on how just totally unhealthy all of it was, and how we're sort of like trained to think of it that way. We see our academic success as both as like a tool to get to the kind of future that we want, and also as a badge of our value as human beings. And if you don't get those good grades, well, then I guess you're not as valuable.
They had those goddamn, how was it called? The sticker charts. I hate sticker charts so much. Where it's like you're doing well, right? And it's like something happens and you get moved down. And then they also had some kind of bullshit where like you earned points or something by doing, like they didn't have homework, but you could earn these points by doing this optional homework, which is like, to me, is like this really gross way of introducing homework, where it's like, oh, we're going to, like, it's not required, we're just going to make you like it because you get rewards. And so that kind of stuff, like, I went in and told him that like he wasn't participating in any of that stuff because I knew it was BS.
It's that punishment by reward thing again in a lot of ways.
Yeah, kind of.
Because like, in theory, this is an extra thing that you can do if you want to, but then it becomes kind of a, well, but why didn't you? Why aren't you as good as that other person?
Right. It's like the thing from like Office Space, something like you're only wearing like the 5 pieces
of flair,
glam or whatever flair. Yeah. It's like, I don't know, but yeah. So like he wasn't on the sticker chart or whatever where, and I'm specifically talking about I might be using the wrong name. There's a lot of different names for all these freaking manipulative things. This is the one where it's like they have your name on like a I don't know, like a clip or something, and they move you up and like you start in the good area, and then if like something happens, I have to talk to you, then you get moved down to like the red area, right?
Oh no!
And so that's why I say it's basically like public shaming.
Ooh. That's like those old things where they used to like post test scores and everybody would have to come up and read them publicly.
Yeah, but yeah, this is really common. Like the behavior charts or whatever they're called, it's really common in like most classrooms, at least in the United States. So, yeah. So but that's the thing. It's like even opting out of it, right? Like you're still seeing that you're kind of left out of this thing, and it creates kind of a no-win situation. Exactly. You're still seeing other kids get treated differently if they get moved down to the red zone a lot, or things like that. I remember one time I tried to do like an exercise, like, hey, could you make a behavior chart thing that wasn't crap? where it was based on like only the kid can move the thing themselves. So it was kind of like your way of asking for help without having to like ask for help.
There are methods of education that don't rely on grading, on tests and homework. Personally, I was lucky enough to go to a Montessori elementary school. And that's not the only educational model that's built off individualized principles. There's also Waldorf and Reggio Emilia. And even if we don't change the whole program, although we should, there are also curricula that exist for social and emotional learning at every stage of development. I don't have time to go into all of that here, but you can find the links in the description below. But most public schools don't have the resources or the freedom to implement that kind of teaching. If we want to give students not only a fair and equitable chance at education, but a chance to really enjoy and self-direct their own learning journey, then we can't keep relying on standardization, stratification, and competition. We have to focus on individuals and the people that they're becoming. But there are a lot of barriers in the way of that goal. The solution is simple. More well-trained, well-supported teachers and staff, smaller class sizes, and individualized attention for every student. But simple does not mean easy. All of those things cost money, rather a lot of it. And all of those things also fly in the face of the systems that are already in place. And worst of all, it's not the only problem. Stay tuned for the next entry in the Ivory Tower series, where I'm focusing on a new aspect of all of these interconnected issues that underlie our educational system. Keep learning, friends.